Hey everybody, so today I have
Come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass.
the prologue and the first chapter of the audiobook for Weeper, narrated by the one and only Mark Woodruff.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
So we're about 70% done with it, and hopefully you'll be ready for pre-order, just like the book, the hardback, and the ebook.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
If you haven't pre-ordered Weeper by now, please go and do it. I'll leave a link below.
Make my day.
Thanks for staying with me on this and my promotion of the book,
I said it before and I'll say it again.
which is something I really don't like to do, but you need to do it if you want to become a writer, so therefore I'm doing it.
Life moves pretty fast.
I hope you enjoy Mark Woodruff's narration of Weeper.
Prologue, 1848. Allegheny Mountains, Pennsylvania. Augustus.
Life is eternal, and love is immortal, and death is only a horizon, and a horizon is nothing save the limit of our sight.
He knew her as the Weeper, a paid mourner. She was sitting away from the others, her face cloistered under a darkened veil. He couldn't stop himself from approaching her, until a huge black man, almost 3 times his height, stepped in front of him, blocking his path. The giant of a man moved away, waved off with the slightest, most graceful gesture of her left hand. Standing before her, the only parts of his body that could move were his eyes, as they examined the veiled creature intently. Without the fear that would typically overwhelm him, his arms moved up. His small 6-year-old fingers slowly lifted her veil, and his bright eyes peeked under. Puffy eyes, red nose, tears streaming down smooth cheeks. He was mesmerized by her slate-gray eyes as they looked tenderly into his own. "Hello, sweet boy," her lips whispered with slight hoarseness from crying. Her voice was also calm and gentle, like a good storyteller reading a bedtime tale. The corners of her mouth raised to a small smile, a contrast to the tears falling down her cheeks. Her emotions moved him. So beautiful, but so sad. Is the remembrance for somebody she loved? A tear formed and rolled down his cheek. She wiped it away with her thumb. "They that sow in tears shall reap in joy." The small smile rose again, brightening her face. "I remember well the day of your birth, Augustus." "You do?" Augustus asked. It was then that his brother, Jefferson, pulled him away from her, and her veil fell like a curtain. Although Augustus didn't know it yet, these were the first words he had ever spoken to his birth mother, and he would not uncover the secret for another 18 years. Chapter 1. 7 years earlier, 1841. Mr. True.
One short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more.
He rode on a brown horse stained black. His business demanded a black horse, but he also thought the black went better with his clothes. A black stovepipe hat and its long black crepe streamers that flowed behind it. He complimented his look with a black overcoat that he'd wear even on sweltering days, along with black slacks and boots. He was tall and slim, with dark straight hair, although it could barely be seen under the hat he always wore. His eyes were big, round, and brown, under dark eyebrows. And as always, he was clean-shaven and smelled of pine sap. He took pride in his appearance, and his black-stained horse added to it. Mr. True believed it to be her wagon ahead of him, and his horse's pace was catching up slowly. Yes, it indeed was the Missus. He thought of slowing down so as not to pass her. Passing her would be rude. But he didn't slow down. Micah, the Finn family slave, or so Mr. True thought, walked in front, leading the buggy's mule. As he heard the hoofbeats behind him, Micah turned and peered around the mule to see who it was. Upon seeing Mr. True's familiar face, he smiled, nodded, and returned his attention to the road. They called her the Missus for no other reason than that's simply what her mother and her mother's mother were called before her. The Missus was the name laid upon all of the women in the Finn family because none of the local folk knew their real names. They usually didn't even know if one of the Finns passed on or if a child was born. The title, the Misses, seemed to come from a place of respect. All the women born into the Finn family were weepers. Weepers were given the respect of a preacher or a nun, and if it weren't for that respect, the Finns would not have any. They were a good distance closer to poor than rich, and aside from selling a few pigs or some extra vegetables now and then, Weeper's income was the only income they had. Mr. True and the Misses knew each other, but had never been formally introduced. Mr. True was in a similar line of business to the Misses. He was a Warner. Like a funeral director, a Warner attended almost every aspect of a loved one's burial. Mr. True's father and grandfather had also been in that profession. It was probably due to this professional proximity that he and the Misses had never officially met. They just assumed each knew who the other was. As for Mr. True, he didn't know if the current Mrs. was the daughter, mother, grandmother, or granddaughter. She was always veiled, and always, like him, wore black. He assumed she was the woman his father had always dealt with. Weeping had always been the main trade for the Finn family. If an outside man married a Finn, he should expect her to continue her trade and keep the Finn surname. That would always be discussed before the wedding was arranged. The only thing that would stop a weeper from weeping was pregnancy. A pregnant woman was a bad omen at funerals, not just for the family of the deceased, but the pregnant woman herself. Although the weepers didn't believe this myth themselves, it was a common notion, and the weepers abided by it. If there were pregnancy or sickness, a sister, mother, or any of the other previous weepers would come out of retirement to take over the duty. Mr. True rode alongside her and kept pace. "Morning," he said to the missus. "Good morning, Mr. True," came a youthful voice from under the veil. It wasn't the older, raspy one he had been used to. The soft sunlight filtered through the canopy of trees covering the dirt road. One soft beam of light came through her veil and just touched her chin, but that was all he could make out. "Fine morning," he said. It was all he could think of saying. He was curious. He wanted to see more, hear more. Mr. True looked over to Micah as he led their mule. Micah was as dark as he was big, so dark it would be hard to see his expression in the dim, light-filtered road. His salt-and-pepper hair had a 2-inch bald patch in the center. He turned to Mr. True as if he felt his eyes on him. Mr. True sharply turned away. Micah was very protective of the missus, and the missus was very protective of Micah. "Fine day for a remembrance," the missus replied. Mr. True was a little nervous, but he wanted the conversation to continue. "You must be the daughter of the last missus." "We're all daughters of the last missus," she replied with an unseen grin. Mr. True also smiled. "Suppose that's true." He again tried to see through her veil, wanting at least a glimpse of what was beneath. "It was your voice that gave you away," he said. "I must have been working with your ma before this." "I've been with you at the last 2 remembrances. This is my 3rd after taking over from my mama." All weepers learned the trade starting at age 4. Finn girls practiced with dead birds or squirrels, burying them as well. 16 would be the earliest a daughter could take over for their mother, but Charlotte was not as enthusiastic as her predecessors at that age. She wasn't that enthusiastic now. "I took over from my pa about 10 years ago now. I spoke to the last weeper a few times." "My mama." "Suppose. No one really knows which one of you it is." She giggled. "I've heard whispers of how we never die, and that I'm 180 years old." Mr. True let out a small laugh. "Yep, heard that many times." "I don't know why. It's tiring. You think they'd know. They see us at market or in town on occasion." "But y'all are never at church." "You know we go to the same church y'all do every Sunday. Preacher Dunn." "Yep, we just don't use the same church service y'all do. We come later in the afternoon." "Why's that?" asked Mr. True. "Well, Preacher Dunn likes it that way, 'cause of the foolish rumor of us all being black widows and all. I was told it used to cause a big commotion when we would show up." "Yep, heard that too." "And might you be thinking it too?" "Oh, me? No." "Well, my pa and my grandma passed on before I was born, but died same as any other fella. No different. And my uncles and brother, they all moved on. When Finn boys marry, they tend to move on with their wife's family." I remember a couple of your uncles moving on down to Johnstown. All the Finn boys do. Who would want to be living with a gaggle of weepers?" "I would," said Micah. The missus rolled her eyes, facing the back of Micah's head. "Anyway, it's all them rumors. You know what folks say about us, Mr. True. That ain't no secret. If it were up to me, I'd be in church with y'all. But it ain't up to me. I guess it's the way it's always been done." Mr. True nodded and adjusted his hat. "Better be getting on. Nice talking to you. Good day." "Good day, Mr. True." It was the most he'd ever spoken to any missus, but this one intrigued him, and the desire to see beneath her veil grew with every step his horse took away from her.